The first settlements. The indigenous cities before colonization. Long before the arrival of European explorers and colonists, North America was already a land filled with vibrant cities and settlements, created and nurtured by Native American civilizations. These were not merely small encampments or nomadic tribes wandering vast plains. In truth, many indigenous groups had created sophisticated, large-scale urban centers that were the heart of culture, trade, and governance. Among these cities, the most prominent was Cahokia, located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri. Cahokia stood as a beacon of urban innovation around the year 1050 CE. With an estimated population of nearly 20,000 at its height, it was comparable in size to European cities like London at the time. Massive earthen mounds dominated its landscape, the largest being Monk's Mound, rising over 100 feet tall. These mounds served as ceremonial centers, residences for leaders, and possibly astronomical observatories. The layout of the city itself was carefully planned, featuring wide plazas, residential areas, and wooden palisades for protection. Cahokia wasn't alone in showcasing urban sophistication. In the southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, also known as Anasazi, built cities into cliffs and across mesas. Chaco Canyon, in present-day New Mexico, flourished between 900 and 1150 CE. Its massive multi-storied buildings, like Pueblo Bonito, could house hundreds. These structures were made of sandstone and timber, displaying intricate masonry that still stands today. Roads connected Chaco to distant settlements, indicating an expansive trade and communication network. Further south, the Hohokam people created complex canal systems in what is now Arizona, irrigating crops and supporting large communities in an otherwise arid desert. Their city centers included platform mounds, ball courts, and plazas, indicating both governance and communal entertainment. On the Atlantic coast, the Mississippian and Iroquoian cultures maintained large villages and confederacies. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Iroquois League, built longhouse villages, which housed extended families under a matrilineal system. Their political organization, a form of democracy led by clan mothers and chiefs, would later inspire elements of the U.S. Constitution. These indigenous urban environments were deeply connected to the natural world, reflecting an ecological balance between human activity and nature. They were spiritual, economic, and political hubs, testaments to native ingenuity and resilience. Unfortunately, many of these cities fell into decline before European contact due to environmental changes, overpopulation, or internal strife. Yet their legacy remains woven into the soil of America's urban history. The story of American cities must begin here, with the cities that came first, that flourished before borders and colonization, and that still whisper through ancient earthworks and sacred ruins. Spanish foundations, St. Augustine and Santa Fe. The Spanish were the first Europeans to establish lasting settlements in what is now the United States. In 1565, they founded St. Augustine in Florida, the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the continental U.S. It wasn't just a military outpost. It was a planned city, complete with homes, markets, churches, and fortifications, particularly the famous Castillo de San Marcos. St. Augustine served both as a military stronghold and a cultural hub. The Spanish brought Catholicism, architecture, new crops, and horses, deeply affecting indigenous life and laying early urban patterns. Despite attacks from pirates and rival European powers, St. Augustine endured, slowly growing into a blend of Spanish and local traditions. Further west, in 1610, the Spanish established Santa Fe in present-day New Mexico. Unlike the coastal cities of the east, Santa Fe emerged in the heart of Pueblo lands, where native traditions were still strong. The Spanish imposed their systems, building missions and introducing Spanish-style plazas and adobe architecture. The result was a cultural fusion, a place where Catholic churches stood near ancient kivas, and where art, language, and food began to reflect both Spanish and Pueblo roots. Santa Fe would become a capital city and a crossroads of trade and culture, eventually tied into the El Camino Real trade route that connected New Mexico with Mexico City. These early Spanish cities laid the foundation for the Southwest's unique identity, a blend of European order and indigenous heritage. Their layouts, cultures, and religious centers became models for many future urban developments in the region. The French influence, New Orleans and the Mississippi. When the French arrived in North America, their primary focus was the vast interior, the rivers, forests, and fur trade. But even explorers and trappers needed central hubs, and so cities were born along the Mississippi River. New Orleans, founded in 1718 by Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville, was perhaps the most iconic of these settlements. Built in a strategic crescent of the Mississippi, it was designed as a port, a military base, and a cultural center. Its grid plan, centered around the Place d'Armes, now Jackson Square, and its French Quarter with balconies and ironwork, remain symbols of its colonial past. New Orleans was never purely French. From the beginning, it was a mix of cultures, native tribes, African slaves, free people of color, Spanish governors, after France ceded the territory, and eventually Americans. It became a melting pot like no other, with Creole cuisine, jazz rhythms, voodoo traditions, and French, Spanish, and English languages echoing through its streets. Other French settlements, like Detroit, founded in 1701, and St. Louis, 1764, also emerged as strategic trading posts along rivers. These cities blended French culture with indigenous alliances and formed the backbone of the fur trade economy. French cities in America may be fewer than English or Spanish ones, but their cultural impact is immense. They carved out cities where music, food, and diversity would thrive for centuries. The Dutch roots of New York, from New Amsterdam. In 1624, the Dutch West India Company established New Amsterdam at the tip of Manhattan Island. This strategic port, sitting at the mouth of the Hudson River, quickly became a bustling center for trade, especially in furs. Unlike some other colonies that focused on religious ideals or conquest, the Dutch had a commercial mindset. They welcomed immigrants, promoted trade with native groups, and emphasized free enterprise. The streets of New Amsterdam were filled with merchants, artisans, Africans, both enslaved and free, and people of various European origins. The city's original Dutch street plan still influences Lower Manhattan today, and many of the city's values, diversity, capitalism, and pragmatism, can be traced to these early days. In 1664, the British captured New Amsterdam and renamed it New York, but the Dutch influence endured. Dutch families, customs, and legal practices left a lasting mark on the city's fabric. Even today, neighborhoods like Harlem, originally Harlem, and the names of boroughs like Brooklyn, originally Brooklyn, echo with Dutch origins. The Puritan vision, Boston and the New England town. Founded in 1630 by English Puritans, Boston was envisioned as a city upon a hill, a moral beacon to the world. These settlers didn't just want land. They wanted to build a godly community. The result was a structured town, centered around the church, the meeting house, and the common green. Early Boston was a tightly knit society. Education, law, and religion were deeply interwoven. Harvard College was founded just 6 years after Boston's settlement, a sign of the Puritans' commitment to literacy and theology. New England towns shared similar layouts, narrow streets, close houses, and an emphasis on communal decision-making through town meetings. These early urban designs influenced democratic traditions in America. Boston grew through trade, shipbuilding, and fishing, and it became a center of resistance during the American Revolution. Its cobbled streets, historical sites, and old churches are remnants of this Puritan legacy, disciplined, ordered, and deeply committed to a vision of community. Quaker dreams, the founding of Philadelphia. In 1682, the English Quaker William Penn arrived in North America with a bold vision, not just to establish a colony, but to build a city that reflected ideals of peace, tolerance, and order. That city would be Philadelphia, a name meaning city of brotherly love, drawn from the ancient Greek words philos, love, and adelphos, brother. Unlike the walled and chaotic cities of Europe, Penn imagined wide streets, public squares, and a layout that encouraged equality rather than hierarchy. Philadelphia's founding was deeply influenced by Quaker beliefs. The Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, rejected violence, hierarchical structures, and the excesses of the Church of England. Their commitment to simplicity, mutual respect, and religious tolerance shaped not only their spiritual life but also the fabric of the city they built. In a time when religious persecution was common across Europe and even in many American colonies, Philadelphia welcomed people of all faiths. Jews, Catholics, Lutherans, and others found refuge here. The city's layout was revolutionary. Penn envisioned a grid system with straight streets crossing at right angles and 5 central squares placed for both beauty and public gathering. This grid system became a model for future American cities. The streets were named not for saints or aristocrats, but for trees, walnut, chestnut, pine, emphasizing natural beauty over human status. By the 18th century, Philadelphia had grown into the largest city in colonial America, surpassing Boston and New York for a time. It was a hub of publishing, education, and political thought. Benjamin Franklin, one of its most famous residents, helped shape its intellectual and civic life, founding the first lending library, the American Philosophical Society, and a fire department. Philadelphia would go on to play a central role in the birth of the United States. Both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were signed in Independence Hall, and the Liberty Bell became an enduring symbol of freedom. The city's Quaker foundations remained influential, not just in architecture or religious tolerance, but in the very idea of what an American city could be. A place of coexistence, planning, and idealism. Southern beginnings, Jamestown and Charleston. Where the North had Puritan towns and Quaker havens, the American South saw the rise of cities shaped by commerce, plantations, and Atlantic trade. The two earliest and most significant urban centers in this region were Jamestown, founded in 1607 in Virginia, and Charleston, founded in 1670 in South Carolina. Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement in North America. It began with desperation and near disaster, disease, hunger, conflict with indigenous tribes, and political chaos nearly destroyed the colony. Yet over time, it stabilized, thanks largely to the cultivation of tobacco, which became the South's first cash crop. Tobacco required land and labor, and thus began the tragic story of enslaved Africans being brought to work the plantations. Jamestown itself was a small fortified town at first, with wooden buildings and a defensive palisade. But as plantations spread, the colony grew, and the early city began to reflect the wealth and inequality that would characterize the South for centuries. Charleston, on the other hand, was a planned city from its inception. Situated on a coastal peninsula, it became a crucial port for the export of rice, indigo, and later cotton. The city's layout followed the Grand Model, a grid plan with wide streets, public squares, and building codes. Charleston quickly became wealthy and cosmopolitan, attracting merchants, enslaved Africans, European artisans, and political thinkers. By the 18th century, Charleston was the wealthiest city in the South and one of the richest in the American colonies. Its skyline featured grand churches, elegant homes, and bustling markets. But behind the beauty was a system built on slavery. Over half of Charleston's population were enslaved people, and their labor built the city's mansions and filled its docks with export goods. These early southern cities were places of stark contrasts: wealth and bondage, elegance and brutality, hospitality and oppression. They helped define the Southern identity, deeply tied to the land, to honor, to agricultural wealth, and tragically, to the institutions of slavery and racial hierarchy. The frontier posts, Detroit and Pittsburgh. As the colonies grew along the coasts, the American frontier pushed steadily westward. Along the edges of settled territory, frontier cities emerged, half military, half trading post. Among the most influential of these were Detroit and Pittsburgh, each founded at a strategic location and serving as gateways to the interior of the continent. Detroit was founded by the French in 1701 as Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit. Located along the Detroit River, which connects Lake Erie to Lake St. Clair, the site was ideal for controlling Great Lakes trade and communication. The fort was initially a military post, but it soon attracted settlers, both French colonists and local indigenous tribes, especially the Ottawa and Huron peoples. Detroit became a multicultural frontier town, where Native Americans, French settlers, and African Americans, both enslaved and free, lived and traded side by side. After the British took control in 1760, and later the Americans, the city retained its role as a military and trading center. Its urban design featured French ribbon farms stretching along the river, narrow plots of land with access to both water and farmland, a pattern still visible in today's geography. Pittsburgh, located at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, where they form the Ohio River, was founded in the mid-18th century around Fort Pitt, a British fort built during the French and Indian War. The site was hotly contested, as whoever controlled this point controlled access to the entire Ohio Valley and beyond. By the late 1700s, Pittsburgh had become an important manufacturing and shipping hub. Its location made it a key stop for settlers heading west and a gateway for goods moving in both directions. Though it would later become synonymous with steel and smoke, in its early years, it was a rough-and-tumble city of traders, blacksmiths, and boatmen. These frontier cities were vital in pushing the boundaries of the young nation. They were rugged, diverse, and dynamic, born out of conflict, sustained by trade, and forever tied to the rivers and routes that flowed through them. Native resistance and adaptation. While settlers were busy building new cities, Native American peoples were not merely fading into the background. Across the continent, many indigenous nations resisted colonization, adapted to new realities, and in some cases, built or maintained urban centers of their own. In the Southeast, the Cherokee Nation adopted aspects of American governance, economy, and architecture in hopes of coexisting with encroaching settlers. Their capital, New Echota, founded in 1825 in present-day Georgia, was modeled on European American towns. It had a council house, printing press, which published materials in the Cherokee syllabary, a written language developed by Sequoyah, and a legal system. Other indigenous cities, like Tahlequah, later in Indian Territory, became centers of cultural preservation and education. Even as forced removal and broken treaties displaced native populations, urban centers provided a way to maintain identity, sovereignty, and resistance. In the Great Lakes and the Plains, leaders like Tecumseh and Black Hawk sought to unite tribes and resist settlement through confederacies and alliances. Their resistance, while often focused on battle, also involved urban planning, creating council sites, trade posts, and ceremonial centers that served as temporary capitals or refuges. The reality was complex. Some native groups allied with European powers, others fought fiercely, and still others adapted through diplomacy and cultural fusion. Cities became focal points for these struggles, places of meeting, resistance, loss, and sometimes rebirth. Though many indigenous cities were eventually destroyed or depopulated, the story of American urban history would be incomplete without them. Today, native-led urban centers are re-emerging, reclaiming space and narrative in the ongoing American story. Tapestry begins, multicultural foundations of urban America. By the late 18th century, the seeds of urban America had been sown across a vast and varied landscape. From the earthen mounds of Cahokia to the brick streets of Boston, from Santa Fe's adobe missions to Philadelphia's Enlightenment halls, American cities reflected a tapestry of cultures, indigenous, African, European, and blended. Each early city carried a unique identity, shaped by its geography, its founding people, and its economic purpose. Some were born of conquest, others of refuge. Some were built on rivers and coasts, others on deserts and bluffs. Yet all shared something in common. They were attempts to bring order, meaning, and permanence to the wilderness of a new world. These first settlements set patterns that would echo across centuries. The grid plans of Philadelphia and Savannah, the ports and plazas of Charleston and New Orleans, the multiculturalism of Detroit and New York. And even more importantly, they seeded ideas about freedom, commerce, community, and identity that would grow alongside the cities themselves. As the young nation moved into revolution, expansion, and industrialization, its cities would change dramatically. But these early urban centers, their struggles, their hopes, and their architectures, would remain embedded in the DNA of American urban life. Cities of the New Republic. Washington, D.C., designing a capital. As the dust of the American Revolution settled and the new republic sought to establish its roots, the question arose: where would the seat of government lie? The answer: a swath of land nestled between Maryland and Virginia, along the banks of the Potomac River. From this political compromise, Washington, D.C. was born, not just a city, but a symbol of the American experiment. The choice of location itself was strategic. The South feared Northern dominance, and the North wanted the capital distanced from plantation power. A Southern capital, but in federal territory, was the answer, neutral ground, purpose-built to house the mechanics of a democratic republic. President George Washington, the city's namesake, chose the precise spot. The layout of the city was entrusted to Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French-American architect and engineer who had served in the Revolutionary War. Inspired by the grandeur of European capitals like Paris and Versailles, L'Enfant envisioned a city of broad avenues radiating from grand circles, sweeping diagonals, and open vistas. Unlike the tight, often chaotic colonial towns, this would be a city of majesty, logic, and vision, representing Enlightenment ideals in stone and street. But from the beginning, building Washington was a slow and messy endeavor. Swarm-planned needed draining. Labor was short. Much of the construction was done by enslaved people, a bitter irony in a capital meant to stand for liberty. Progress was halting, but the vision endured. The Capitol building rose on its hill, slowly becoming the iconic dome we know today. The White House, originally called the President's House, emerged a few miles away, facing what would one day become Pennsylvania Avenue. In the early 1800s, Washington felt more like a village with big dreams than a functioning capital. Dirt roads, half-finished buildings, and little nightlife defined it. Foreign visitors often mocked its pretensions. But slowly, institutions took root: the Library of Congress, Supreme Court, Smithsonian, and National Mall. Even in its earliest years, Washington, D.C. was more than a hub of politics. It was an experiment in planning, an expression of ideals in urban form. It showed that cities could be made from scratch to reflect values, not just economics or accident. And though it took generations to mature into the stately capital we know, the seeds were sown in those early republic years, seeds of power, contradiction, ambition, and unity. The expansion of New York. New York, once a modest Dutch trading post known as New Amsterdam, entered the 19th century with energy in its bones. The Revolution had left its scars, but also its fire. As the Republic matured, so too did New York City, swelling in size, ambition, and influence until it began to resemble the sprawling metropolis we know today. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, transformed New York's fate. Connecting the Hudson River to the Great Lakes, it made the city the gateway between the American interior and the world. Goods from the Midwest, wheat, corn, lumber, iron, flowed down the canal to New York's harbor, and from there, to Europe and beyond. This explosion of trade sparked a building frenzy. Warehouses, shipyards, merchant houses, and tenements sprang up along the waterfront. Immigration, too, changed the city's rhythm. Irish immigrants, fleeing famine and poverty, began arriving in waves. Soon came Germans, Italians, and Eastern Europeans. By mid-century, New York was a mosaic of languages, faces, and customs, vibrant and chaotic. Immigrant labor built the city even as it reshaped it. The city's layout evolved, too. In 1811, the Commissioner's Plan laid out a rigid grid system for Manhattan, carving it into numbered streets and avenues. Critics called it soulless, but it enabled rapid growth and real estate speculation. Unlike older cities with winding alleys, New York's grid was a blueprint for expansion, precise, scalable, and modern. And culture thrived. Newspapers, theaters, public libraries, and opera houses filled the air with debate, drama, and dreams. Wall Street became the beating heart of American finance. Central Park, planned in the 1850s, offered a green oasis amid the clamor. New York's expansion was not without suffering. Overcrowding, disease, fires, and poverty plagued the lower classes. Yet even through hardship, New York stood as a beacon of possibility. A city of immigrants, entrepreneurs, and ideas, a mirror of the young republic itself. Boston's intellectual awakening. In the quiet parlors and echoing lecture halls of Boston, something stirring was happening in the early 1800s. While other cities boomed with commerce and shipping, Boston began crafting a different identity, that of the intellectual and cultural heart of the new republic. Boston had long been a seat of learning, home to Harvard College, founded in 1636. But the early 19th century saw a flowering of what became known as the American Renaissance, a wave of philosophical, literary, and artistic ferment. Transcendentalism, a uniquely American movement, emerged here. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller walked Boston's streets, lectured in its halls, and shaped its soul. Newspapers and journals like the Atlantic Monthly gave voice to new ideas. Abolitionism found fertile ground here. Boston was home to William Lloyd Garrison, whose newspaper The Liberator became a rallying cry against slavery. The city was also a stronghold for education reform, led by figures like Horace Mann, who advocated for public schooling. The architecture reflected this intellectual posture. Public libraries, lecture halls, and stately brownstones created a cityscape of thoughtfulness and refinement. The Boston Athenaeum, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and the Boston Public Library served as repositories of knowledge and community pride. Yet Boston was not only bookish. Its harbor remained busy, its factories grew, and its neighborhoods bustled. But its truest identity, by the 1830s and 1840s, was as the brain of America, a city where ideas mattered and where the Republic's future was debated not just in government halls but in cafes, churches, and salons. Baltimore and the shipping trade. Tucked into the shores of Chesapeake Bay, Baltimore emerged in the early 19th century as one of the most important port cities in the United States. Founded in 1729, its location made it a natural hub for shipping, trade, and commerce. But it was in the years following independence that Baltimore truly came into its own. The city's harbor, deep, sheltered, and close to the Atlantic, bustled with ships from the Caribbean, Europe, and the South. Tobacco, grain, cotton, and iron were exported in great quantities, while finished goods and luxury items flowed in. The inner harbor became a maze of wharves, warehouses, rope walks, and shipyards. Baltimore was also the birthplace of the clipper ship, a sleek and fast vessel that revolutionized maritime trade. These ships could outrun pirates, cut down travel time, and gave Baltimore merchants a competitive edge. Its strategic importance made it a military target during the War of 1812. The Battle of Baltimore and the bombardment of Fort McHenry became national legends. It was here that Francis Scott Key penned the words to the Star-Spangled Banner as rockets burst in the air above the harbor. Culturally, Baltimore was a city of contrasts. Its upper classes lived in elegant row houses on Mount Vernon Place, while the docks teemed with working-class laborious, many of them recent immigrants. The city had a large free black population, one of the largest in the country, which played a vital role in its economic and cultural life. Baltimore wasn't as flashy as New York or as philosophical as Boston, but it was a workhorse city, gritty, productive, and proud. It symbolized the economic pulse of the early republic, a place where goods, people, and ideas flowed with a tide of ambition. Savannah's southern charm. Down in Georgia, near the Atlantic coast, the city of Savannah quietly charmed its way into the heart of the new republic. Founded in 1733 by James Oglethorpe, it was one of the first planned cities in America, a jewel of the South known for its graceful squares, oak-lined streets, and historic homes. Savannah was laid out in a grid system with public squares at regular intervals, open green spaces meant for community gathering, military drilling, or simple beauty. This thoughtful design gave the city an airy, balanced feeling, unlike the crowded, haphazard towns of the north. Economically, Savannah thrived on cotton. As the cotton gin revolutionized production, Savannah's port became a key export hub. Plantation wealth, however, was built on the back of enslaved labor, and the city, while elegant, was deeply entwined in the institution of slavery. Despite this, Savannah had a unique cultural life. It was cosmopolitan in flavor, influenced by English, French, and African traditions. Gullah culture, blending African and European elements, was especially rich in the coastal regions around the city. Savannah was also a place of contradictions. Elegance and brutality, hospitality and oppression. Its squares and mansions whispered of beauty and sorrow alike. And in time, it would become a symbol, not only of the Old South's charm but also of its complex, painful history. New Orleans, a city of music and mix. In the heart of Louisiana, where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico, lies the enchanting city of New Orleans. Unlike any other American city, it was shaped not just by the Revolution but by a blend of French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean influences that made it a vibrant and unique corner of the new republic. Originally settled by the French in the early 1700s, New Orleans passed to the Spanish in 1763, and then to the Americans with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Yet, even as a U.S. city, New Orleans never lost its old world soul. The French Quarter, with its wrought iron balconies and narrow alleys, hummed with music, laughter, and life. New Orleans was a city of trade, fueled by the river's lifeblood. Cotton, sugar, molasses, and rum flowed in and out of its docks. Enslaved Africans were bought and sold in its squares, and their cultures deeply influenced the city's food, language, and, most memorably, its music. Here, early forms of jazz and blues would find their roots in the spirituals and street rhythms of the enslaved. Religion, too, was diverse and deeply rooted. Catholicism dominated, unlike most other parts of the Protestant Republic. Grand cathedrals like St. Louis Cathedral stood as symbols of this spiritual heritage. New Orleans danced to a different beat, literally and figuratively. While Washington stood for politics and Boston for ideas, New Orleans offered a reminder that America was also a land of Creole flavor, where the boundaries between cultures blurred and something entirely new was born. Rise of urban newspapers. As cities expanded in the early republic, so too did the demand for information, and nothing met that demand like the rise of urban newspapers. These bustling new centers of population needed news of commerce, politics, crime, and society. Enter the age of the press. In Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, printing presses clattered to life, churning out daily sheets filled with stories, opinion, and advertisements. Newspapers were more than just sources of news. They became instruments of identity and influence. In a young democracy, the written word shaped public thought. Papers like the New York Evening Post, the National Intelligencer, and the Boston Gazette informed citizens of debates in Congress, wars abroad, and local affairs. Pamphlets, essays, and editorials filled their pages, offering fiery rhetoric on slavery, women's rights, and party politics. The technology improved too. Steam-powered presses allowed for faster production. Penny papers, sold cheaply on street corners by ragged newsboys, made news accessible to the working class. Reading the paper became a daily ritual for many, in coffee houses, on porches, and around kitchen tables. Journalism wasn't always objective. Many papers were openly partisan, backing Federalists or Democratic Republicans. But even in their bias, they contributed to the great American conversation. These early newspapers gave voice to a noisy republic, a place where opinions clashed, ideas spread, and the printed word became a cornerstone of civic life. The spread of fire codes and public works. As American cities grew, so did the dangers that came with tight living spaces, wooden buildings, and open flames. Fires, epidemics, and waste plagued the early urban experience. And so, from necessity, the Republic turned to public works and safety measures, laying the foundation for modern infrastructure. The 19th century saw a wave of city governments passing fire codes. Wooden chimneys were banned. Brick construction was encouraged. Fire brigades, often made up of volunteers, were established in cities like Philadelphia and Charleston. Bright red fire engines became a familiar sight, pulled by horses and fueled by civic pride. But it wasn't just about fire. Clean water became a public priority. Aqueducts and reservoirs were constructed to bring fresh water to the masses. In New York, the Croton Aqueduct, begun in the 1830s, delivered millions of gallons of clean water from upstate, a marvel of engineering at the time. Sewage systems followed. Streets were graded and paved. Gas lamps lit the nights, replacing candles and bringing a soft glow to city evenings. These changes weren't always glamorous, but they were essential. They signaled a shift. The Republic was not just growing, it was organizing itself. In the silence of the night, under the stars, a lamplighter might stroll by, tipping his flame to the next post. A quiet symbol of civilization flickering into place. City mayors and early governance. As American cities expanded, governance became more than just the concern of Congress and state capitals. City governments, once simple town councils, grew more complex, and at their heads stood the new mayors of the Republic. In early America, mayors were often appointed, not elected. They were local elites, merchants, lawyers, or landowners, chosen more for their status than their political acumen. But as democracy matured, many cities began to elect their leaders, ushering in an era of urban politics. These early mayors had limited powers, but great responsibility. They oversaw markets, road repairs, militias, and public safety. In places like New York, the mayor had to balance the demands of wealthy merchants, the needs of immigrants, and the ever-present concerns of disease, crime, and fire. Municipal charters were written. City councils formed. Departments for sanitation, water, and law enforcement emerged. Corruption often ran deep, especially in port cities flush with trade and vice. But so too did innovation. City governance became a testing ground for Republican ideals. Could local governments serve the people efficiently and fairly? Could democracy scale down as well as up? The results were mixed, but the foundations were laid. Through mistakes and successes, the American city became a functioning, self-governing organism. Religion and churches in city life. Amidst the brick and bustle of early American cities, the sound of church bells was a constant. Rising above the noise of carts and commerce, religion remained a steady pulse, shaping the moral, social, and architectural landscape of the Republic. Churches weren't just places of worship. They were community centers, schools, meeting halls, and sometimes political battlegrounds. In Boston, the Old South Meeting House was where revolutionaries once gathered. In New York, Trinity Church stood as a towering symbol of Anglican tradition. In Philadelphia, Quaker meeting houses quietly shaped the city's spirit. The urban religious landscape was diverse. Congregationalists, Episcopalians, Methodists, Baptists, Catholics, Jews, and even freethinkers built sanctuaries in stone and wood. Each city block might house a different denomination, a different language of worship, a different hymn. With immigration came even more diversity. Catholic churches sprang up to serve Irish and German communities. Synagogues were established by Sephardic Jews in Charleston and Philadelphia. African Americans, both free and enslaved, founded their own independent black churches, like Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia, one of the first of its kind. Religion shaped charity work. Orphanages, hospitals, and schools were often church-run. Sermons spoke not only of heaven, but of slavery, temperance, poverty, and reform. Clergy became public voices, guiding civic conscience in turbulent times. In the soft light of stained glass and the echo of old hymns, city dwellers found not only faith, but belonging, order, and the spiritual architecture to frame the new world they were building. The Industrial Awakening. The rise of factory cities. As the 19th century unfurled its long industrial shadow over the United States, the quiet, horse-drawn cities of the past began to hum, thrum, and shudder with a new force, industry. This was the age of machines, and with it came the rise of factory cities, those clustered, smokestack-studded hubs where iron met ambition, and cotton threads wove the fabric of a new national identity. In the early days, factories were small. Often powered by water wheels, they clung to rivers in New England, humble brick buildings churning out textiles, shoes, tools, and rope. But by mid-century, steam and later electricity transformed production. The factory became not just a workplace but an ecosystem. Cities like Paterson, New Jersey, and Lowell, Massachusetts didn't grow beside factories. They were built for them. Life in these cities was dictated by bells and whistles. A morning horn signaled the start of work. A shrill ring marked its end. Inside, under rows of gas lamps, workers toiled for 10 or 12 hours, often 6 days a week. Men, women, and even children labored on assembly lines, their movements repetitive, their fingers quick. These factory towns weren't beautiful in the traditional sense. Soot stained the air. Wooden tenements creaked under the weight of overcrowding. But they possessed their own strange rhythm, a choreography of labor and survival. The cities were alive with motion. Trolleys clanged, furnaces roared, and every corner echoed with the footfall of a shifting population. Economically, factory cities powered America's transition from an agrarian to an industrial giant. Politically, they gave rise to labor unions, strikes, and worker movements. Socially, they reshaped class and gender roles. Here, a girl from the countryside might become the family's breadwinner. A recent immigrant might transform into a skilled tradesman. An entire nation, once defined by fields and forests, was now being forged in brick, iron, and sweat. The boom of railroads and terminals. If factories were the heart of industrial America, railroads were its veins. They pumped goods, people, and ideas across thousands of miles, stitching together distant towns, frontier outposts, and bustling cities into one cohesive, steel-bound network. And at the core of this system stood the majestic, chaotic world of rail terminals. In the 1830s, America had just a few dozen miles of track. By the end of the century, it boasted more than 200,000 miles, winding across prairies, mountains, and city streets. These iron arteries brought coal from Appalachia, grain from Kansas, cattle from Texas, and immigrants from Ellis Island, funneling them into a roaring urban machine. Terminals were not mere stations. They were cathedrals of commerce. Grand Central Depot in New York, Union Station in Chicago, and Reading Terminal in Philadelphia towered over city blocks with high-arched ceilings, clattering halls, and thick walls echoing with steam and whistle blasts. They served not only as points of arrival and departure, but also as symbols of progress. Cities reoriented themselves around these hubs. Neighborhoods rose beside rail yards. Hotels, warehouses, and restaurants clustered nearby. An entire class of workers, porters, signalmen, switch operators, telegraph clerks, and station masters, emerged to manage the bustle. Yet with growth came tension. Land disputes flared. Rail monopolies gouged prices. Immigrant workers laid dangerous tracks for little pay. Cities like St. Louis and Cincinnati were transformed, some say swallowed, by the very tracks they laid. Still, the train gave something extraordinary in return. Speed, scale, and connection. A letter that once took weeks could now arrive in days. A family once scattered might reunite. A farmer once isolated could now sell to a market 1,000 miles away. And in the quiet lull after the train's departure, the smoke hanging gently in the air, the rails still humming, a city could feel, if only for a moment, the pulse of a new century surging forward. Chicago, city of big shoulders. In the flat, windy expanse of the Midwest rose a city that would come to define American industrial might. Chicago, vast, muscular, and unflinching, earned the nickname City of Big Shoulders for good reason. It was a city that carried the weight of industry, immigration, and ambition all at once. By the 1830s, Chicago was little more than a muddy outpost. But by the 1870s, it had become the nation's rail hub, meatpacking capital, and grain storage depot. Everything moved through Chicago. Hogs, cattle, lumber, steel, and people, always people. The Union Stockyards, opened in 1865, were a marvel and a horror. Miles of pens and processing plants turned animals into meat at astonishing speed. The smell was overpowering. Workers, many of them recent immigrants, stood elbow-deep in blood and brine, their lives captured later in Upton Sinclair's searing novel The Jungle. Chicago wasn't elegant. It was imposing. Its downtown skyline rose higher with each passing decade, especially after the Great Fire of 1871, which burned most of the city to the ground. Out of the ashes rose new buildings, new neighborhoods, and new dreams. It became a city of architects, from Daniel Burnham to Louis Sullivan, who imagined not just taller buildings but a more orderly urban future. The people of Chicago were as diverse as its industries. Poles, Irish, Germans, African Americans, and Swedes poured in, forming tight-knit ethnic enclaves. Strikes and protests were common, none more famous than the Haymarket Affair of 1886, which ended in violence and transformed labor relations nationwide. And through it all, Chicago stood tall, a symbol of what industry could build and what it could break. In its steel bones and smoky lungs lived the promise, and the peril, of America's industrial age. Detroit, machines, steel, and smoke. Long before it was the Motor City, Detroit was a city of machines, steel, and sweat. Nestled beside the Detroit River, it began its industrial journey not with cars but with iron stoves, shipbuilding, and railroad cars. Heavy industries powered by the city's rich natural resources and strategic location. By the mid-1800s, Detroit was humming with factories. Foundries, tool shops, and steam engine works filled the city's east and west sides. Its location along the Great Lakes shipping routes meant goods could move in and out efficiently, feeding the growth of both commerce and population. But the real transformation came in the early 20th century with a quiet revolution led by a man named Henry Ford. His innovation wasn't just the automobile, it was the assembly line. Ford's Highland Park plant, opened in 1910, changed everything. Cars that once took days to build could now be assembled in under 2 hours. This innovation didn't just transform Detroit, it reshaped the world. Workers, many of them African Americans fleeing the segregation of the South, poured into Detroit during the Great Migration, seeking steady work and a better life. The city swelled. Neighborhoods rose. A new kind of middle class was born. But with growth came hardship. Pollution blackened the skies. Labor strikes rocked the factories. Tensions between workers and management often boiled over. Yet Detroit endured, its identity forged in metal and movement. In the gentle hum of machines and the glow of welding sparks, Detroit whispered a promise. That from repetition could come revolution, and that even the harshest work could build something enduring. Cleveland and the Great Lakes industry. Cleveland, nestled on the shores of Lake Erie, might have seemed quiet at first glance, but it was, in truth, one of the industrial powerhouses of the Great Lakes region. A city of canals, furnaces, and freight, Cleveland thrived at the intersection of iron ore, coal, and ingenuity. The opening of the Ohio and Erie Canal in the 1830s connected Cleveland to the Ohio River, unlocking a vital trade route. Soon after, the Cuyahoga River, which curved through the heart of the city, became lined with mills, foundries, and factories. Iron ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range poured into the port, and coal from southern Ohio kept the furnaces blazing. Cleveland became famous for producing steel, machinery, and chemicals. The Standard Oil Company, founded by John D. Rockefeller, had its headquarters there, turning Cleveland into a capital of American capitalism. The workers, many of them Eastern European immigrants, lived in neighborhoods like Slavic Village and Tremorne, where church steeples rose beside smokestacks. The city was gritty but proud. Its industrial might helped power the railroads, the Navy, and even early automobiles. In the haze of smoke and the clang of metal, Cleveland was not always easy to love, but it was essential. It embodied the raw, muscular drive that fueled a rising America. Lowell, the Mill Girls City. Along the banks of the Merrimack River in Massachusetts rose a city built almost entirely from imagination and ambition, Lowell. Named after industrialist Francis Cabot Lowell, this planned city was one of the earliest large-scale examples of American industrialization. But it wasn't just the machines that made Lowell unique. It was the people, more specifically, the young women, who powered them. In the early 1800s, Lowell became the epicenter of textile manufacturing in the United States. Its massive brick mill buildings, powered by water wheels, spun cotton into cloth with mechanical precision. But unlike other cities where factory workers were mostly immigrants or laborious from the lower class, Lowell sought to attract a different kind of workforce, New England farm girls, known to history as the Mill Girls. These were daughters of farmers, some barely out of their teens, who left rural life for the city with dreams of independence, education, and wages of their own. They lived in supervised boarding houses, attended lectures, read literature, and even published their own magazine, the Lowell Offering. But the work was grueling. Days stretched from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., with the clatter of looms and the heat of steam a constant companion. Injuries were common. The air was thick with cotton dust. And over time, Wages fell, hours grew longer, and conditions worsened, prompting strikes and early labor activism. Yet, Lowell's legacy is more than its cloth or its canals. It was a prototype, a glimpse into what an industrial American city could be: orderly, ambitious, and, for a time, idealistic. In the quiet evenings after work, as the bells stopped ringing and lamplight flickered in the boarding house windows, the mill girls stitched not just fabric but a chapter in the nation's history. The grit of Pittsburgh. Nestled at the meeting point of three rivers, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio, Pittsburgh earned many nicknames over the years: Steel City, Smoky City, and the Workshop of the World. It was here that fire met ore, and from that union rose the steel beams, rails, and girders that built America. By the mid-19th century, Pittsburgh was already a growing industrial center, but it was the steel industry that would define its soul. Fueled by coal from nearby mines, iron ore shipments, and an army of skilled workers, the city became home to the most advanced steel mills in the world. No name is more tied to this rise than Andrew Carnegie. A Scottish immigrant, Carnegie built a steel empire that transformed Pittsburgh into a global industrial giant. His mills in places like Homestead operated day and night, spewing out molten metal that would become everything from railroad tracks to skyscraper skeletons. The city's air was thick with soot, so much so that street lamps stayed on during the day. Men came home from work blackened with dust, their lungs filled with particles of coal and iron. But there was also pride. To work in the mills was to help build something bigger than yourself. Neighborhoods grew alongside the factories, often divided by ethnicity. Polish Hill, German Hill, and Little Italy were not just addresses but cultural havens. The churches, bars, and corner stores offered familiarity in a city that could often feel hard and unyielding. Despite the grit, or perhaps because of it, Pittsburgh stood as a monument to resilience. Its skyline, shadowed by smokestacks, told the story of a city that never stopped forging forward. Immigration waves and ethnic neighborhoods. As American cities swelled with industry, they opened their arms and factory gates to a massive influx of immigrants. By the late 19th century, ships docking at Ellis Island and Boston Harbor poured forth wave after wave of newcomers. Italians, Irish, Poles, Jews, Germans, Chinese, and many more. Each group brought its own language, culture, and dreams, and together they transformed the urban landscape. Cities divided into ethnic enclaves, not by force but by familiarity. Little Italy, Chinatown, Jewish quarters. These were more than neighborhoods, they were sanctuaries. Here, shop signs reflected the old tongue. Churches, synagogues, and temples dotted the streets. Food, music, and customs created an urban mosaic. For many immigrants, America was not easy. Housing was cramped. Work was hard. Factory jobs were repetitive and often dangerous. Language barriers and prejudice loomed. But these communities offered comfort and support. New arrivals found lodging with relatives, jobs through ethnic networks, and a sense of belonging amid the unfamiliar. Children often became the bridges, learning English in school and helping their parents navigate this new world. Some rose quickly, opening businesses, becoming teachers or clerks. Others faced tougher roads, caught between two cultures, struggling to keep traditions alive while adapting to new ways. By 1900, the foreign-born population of major cities like New York and Chicago was staggering. Immigrant labor built the railroads, worked in the mills, and kept the factories running. They played a central, if often underappreciated, role in building modern America. In the early morning, as bakery ovens warmed on Mulberry Street and Hebrew prayers echoed on the Lower East Side, the heartbeat of immigrant America pulsed through its neighborhoods, proud, persistent, and hopeful. Pollution and crowded tenements. The industrial city was a marvel of production, but it was also a cauldron of pollution and poverty. For many who arrived seeking opportunity, what they found instead were crowded tenements, choking air, and diseases that spread like whispers in the night. In cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, workers and their families often crammed into 5- or 6-story buildings, subdivided into tiny apartments. These tenements were poorly ventilated, rarely had indoor plumbing, and were sometimes so overcrowded that people slept in shifts, one in the bed while another worked. The streets below weren't much better. Horses, open sores, industrial runoff, and trash created an overwhelming stench. The air was filled with soot, smoke, and the sharp tang of chemicals. Rivers and lakes became dumping grounds for factories, turning once clear waters into toxic currents. Diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, and typhoid thrived. Fires were frequent, especially in neighborhoods where buildings were made of wood and families used candles for light. Children grew up too fast, not in playgrounds but in alleyways, helping parents earn money or care for younger siblings. Reformers like Jacob Riis began to document the horrors in books like How the Other Half Lives, using early photography to show wealthier Americans what poverty really looked like. These images stirred outrage and eventually led to housing reforms, sanitation laws, and new understandings of public health. Still, for decades, the city was a place of contradiction, booming with progress but burdened by suffering. At dusk, as factory horns sounded and workers trudged home through smoky streets, the dream of a better life flickered gently behind grimy tenement windows. Skyscrapers begin to rise. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, American cities began to look up. The age of the skyscraper had arrived, transforming not just skylines, but the very way urban life functioned. It was a leap of imagination made possible by steel, elevators, and a relentless belief in progress. Before this era, buildings were limited by what brick and wood could support. But with the advent of steel frame construction, architects could now build 10, 15, even 20 stories into the sky. The elevator, perfected by Alicia Otis, made these heights accessible and practical. The first true skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, rose in 1885, standing 10 stories tall. It was soon surpassed. In New York, the race to the sky accelerated. The Flatiron Building, with its unique triangular shape, became an icon. And by the 1910s, towers like the Woolworth Building soared over 50 stories. These buildings weren't just tall, they were statements. Their ornate facades, marble lobbies, and brass elevators spoke of power, ambition, and elegance. Inside, the modern office was born, a world of telephones, typewriters, and ticking clocks. Skyscrapers also changed the streets below. Shadows lengthened. Wind patterns shifted. Urban density intensified. With more people working in concentrated areas, cities expanded upward, not outward. But these towers also symbolized something deeper, that the city was no longer constrained by nature. With steel, glass, and vision, humans had bent the rules of gravity itself. And in the soft glow of twilight, as lights blinked on in windows high above, the American city no longer seemed earthbound. It had begun to dream and build in the clouds. The Gold Rush and San Francisco. In 1848, a simple discovery by a carpenter named James W. Marshall at Sutter's Mill in California sent ripples that would echo across the world. Gold had been found, shimmering, gleaming, promising wealth beyond imagination. The news spread like wildfire, pulling tens of thousands westward in what became known as the California Gold Rush. At the heart of this frenzy was San Francisco, a sleepy settlement turned boomtown almost overnight. Once a tiny Spanish mission town with dusty streets and wooden buildings, San Francisco's population exploded from about 1,000 in 1848 to over 25,000 by 1850. The city became a chaotic hub where prospectors, merchants, gamblers, and dreamers mingled. Makeshift tents and shanties sprang up along the waterfront, with saloons and dance halls offering brief respite from the grueling search for gold. Ships from around the globe docked at its harbor, unloading people who came by sea to join the rush. San Francisco's geography, a peninsula jutting into the Pacific, made it a natural port, but also a city squeezed between hills and the bay. Fires, mudslides, and lawlessness challenged the young city, yet its resilience grew alongside the gold rush fortunes. The gold rush not only built San Francisco physically but culturally. It became a place of diversity, with Chinese immigrants arriving to work the mines and build the city's infrastructure, and with communities from all corners of the world making it their home. San Francisco was the gateway to the American West, a city born from dreams of wealth but tempered by grit and survival. Its story was the first chapter in the grand tale of Western urbanization. Denver and the mountain frontier. To the east, nestled against the foothills of the Rockies, another city was staking its claim on the western frontier, Denver. Founded in 1858 during the Colorado Gold Rush, Denver began as a tent city on the banks of the South Platte River. It quickly became a supply center for miners heading into the nearby mountains. Unlike San Francisco's coastal bustle, Denver's story was one of rugged determination amid towering peaks and wild landscapes. It was the last outpost of civilization before the untamed Rockies stretched westward. Denver's growth was tied not only to gold but to its location as a crossroads. As railroads pushed westward, Denver became a critical link, connecting miners, farmers, and traders. The city attracted settlers eager for new opportunities, but also faced challenges from the harsh winters, limited resources, and conflicts with Native American tribes. Over time, Denver evolved from a rough mining camp to a more permanent city. Brick buildings replaced tents, streets were laid out in a grid, and public buildings like schools and churches began to anchor the community. Denver's story is one of transformation, from frontier tent to modern city, embodying the spirit of the Mountain West and the people who braved it. Salt Lake City and the Mormon vision. In the middle of the vast western desert, where few dared to settle, arose a city born from faith and perseverance, Salt Lake City. Founded in 1847 by Brigham Young and a group of Mormon pioneers, it was a refuge from persecution and a bold attempt to create a community guided by religious principles. The Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, journeyed thousands of miles across the plains to the Salt Lake Valley, a place they believed was divinely appointed. Here, in the harsh desert, they planned a city unlike any other, with wide streets and irrigated farmland. Salt Lake City was built on meticulous planning and cooperation. The pioneers dug canals to bring water from nearby mountains, turning desert into fields. They built temples and meeting houses that anchored their community spiritually and socially. Unlike other Western boomtowns, Salt Lake City's growth was steady and focused on sustainability. Its economy blended agriculture, craftsmanship, and later mining and trade. The city became a center of culture, education, and governance in the region. Salt Lake City's story is a testament to vision and resilience, a city built on faith, shaping the West with its unique identity and enduring legacy. Portland and the Timber Trails. Far to the northwest, surrounded by dense forests and winding rivers, Portland, Oregon rose as a city deeply connected to the natural world. Founded in 1845 near the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia rivers, Portland's growth was fueled by the booming timber industry. The vast Pacific Northwest forests provided an abundant resource of cedar, fir, and pine, trees that would be cut, milled, and shipped all over the country. Portland became the center of this trade, with sawmills lining its waterways and ships carrying lumber to the coasts and inland. But Portland's story was also one of waterways and trails. The city's location made it a natural hub for river transportation, connecting it to other emerging western towns. Roads and railroads followed the timber trails, linking forests to markets. The city's residents lived close to nature's bounty, but also faced challenges from flooding and isolation. Portland's planners worked to build bridges, dams, and levees to tame the rivers. By the early 20th century, Portland was no longer just a logging town but a thriving urban center with theaters, schools, and parks. A city growing alongside the forest, shaped by its landscape and industry. Seattle's coffee-cold beginnings. Seattle's story begins in the shadows of giant evergreens and on the shores of Puget Sound, a city that started quietly but would roar into prominence. Founded in the 1850s, Seattle was initially a logging camp and fishing village, often cold and damp, earning the nickname Coffee-Cold. The city grew slowly, its fortunes tied to the forests and waters that surrounded it. Logging camps stretched for miles, sending timber down rivers to sawmills. Fishing fleets harvested salmon from the Sound, feeding local markets and export. Seattle's growth accelerated with the arrival of the railroad in the 1880s, connecting it to eastern markets. The Great Seattle Fire of 1889, while devastating, cleared the way for new brick and stone buildings, setting the stage for modernization. Over the next decades, Seattle blossomed into a port city with an emerging technology and trade sector. The city's iconic Space Needle and coffee culture would come much later, but the roots were planted in those early, chilly days. Seattle's tale is one of quiet endurance and slow-building ambition, a city waiting for its moment to shine. Los Angeles, from Pueblo to paradise. From its beginnings as a small Spanish pueblo in 1781, Los Angeles has transformed into a sprawling metropolis known worldwide. The early settlers came to cultivate the fertile valleys, raising cattle and farming crops. For much of the 19th century, Los Angeles remained a modest town, isolated by deserts and mountains. But the arrival of the railroad in the 1870s changed everything, linking the city to the rest of the country and sparking a land boom. The city grew rapidly in the early 20th century, fueled by real estate speculation, oil discoveries, and the rise of the film industry. Hollywood became the dream factory, drawing talent and ambition from around the globe. Los Angeles expanded in all directions, spreading into suburbs, developing freeways, and shaping a car-centric culture. Its sunny climate attracted newcomers eager to escape colder regions. Los Angeles' story is one of transformation, from humble origins to a city of dreams, contradictions, and boundless energy. Phoenix, the desert city. In the heart of the Arizona desert, Phoenix emerged as an unlikely urban center. Founded in 1867 by settlers attracted to the fertile lands along the Salt River, Phoenix's growth was made possible by irrigation projects that tamed the arid environment. The city expanded slowly, its population rising as new canals brought water to the desert. Agriculture thrived, citrus orchards, cotton fields, and alfalfa farms dotted the landscape. By the mid-20th century, Phoenix was booming, thanks in part to air conditioning technology that made the hot summers bearable. The city grew outward in sprawling neighborhoods, embracing the desert rather than fighting it. Phoenix's story is one of human ingenuity, turning a harsh landscape into a livable city, blending modernity with the natural desert beauty. Railroads meet the Pacific. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 was a defining moment in American history, connecting the east and west coasts and transforming cities along the route. Railroads met the Pacific in cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, linking them to national markets. Railroads shaped city growth, determining where industries and populations concentrated. Terminals became bustling hubs of activity, with goods, people, and ideas flowing through day and night. The railroads also brought challenges: competition for land, labor disputes, and environmental impacts. But they symbolized progress, speed, and the shrinking of a vast continent. The meeting of railroads and the Pacific Ocean created gateways, cities that stood as both endpoints and beginnings in America's expansion story. Wild West towns that became cities. Many Western cities began as wild frontier towns, rowdy, rough, and often lawless. Places like Tombstone, Arizona, or Virginia City, Nevada, known for saloons, gunfights, and mining booms, eventually settled into permanent communities. As mining gave way to trade and agriculture, these towns built schools, churches, and government buildings. Their dusty streets were paved, and their populations diversified. The transformation from Wild West to city was uneven and often fraught with conflict, but it reflected the American spirit of taming the frontier and building civilization. These towns hold stories of legends and myths, but also of families, pioneers, and the slow march of progress. The growth of the Western grid. One of the most striking features of Western cities is their orderly street grids, straight lines stretching for miles, a stark contrast to older, winding Eastern cities. This design came from the Land Ordinance of 1785, which established a system for surveying and dividing Western lands into square townships. The grid made land sales, urban planning, and expansion easier. Cities like Denver, Salt Lake City, and Los Angeles adopted these plans, creating neat, navigable streets. While practical, the grid also shaped social and economic life, determining where neighborhoods, parks, and business districts grew. In the evenings, when city lights flicker on along these straight avenues, The grid reveals the carefully planned ambition of the American West, a vision laid out 1 square mile at a time. Ellis Island and the gateway to America. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, millions of immigrants arrived at the gateway to America, Ellis Island. Opened in 1892 in New York Harbor, Ellis Island became the symbolic entrance point for newcomers seeking opportunity, refuge, and a new life. The island was both a beacon of hope and a place of anxiety. For many, it represented freedom from poverty, oppression, or political turmoil in their home countries. For others, it was the first challenge on their American journey, a place of rigorous medical inspections, legal questioning, and the looming fear of rejection. Ellis Island's vast processing center saw over 12 million immigrants pass through its halls. From crowded steerage ship cabins to long lines, the journey was often grueling. But stepping onto Ellis Island was stepping into possibility. The island was staffed by doctors, clerks, interpreters, and officials who evaluated each person's health, skills, and intentions. Some were detained for days or weeks, while others were sent back to Europe. Beyond the procedures, Ellis Island represented the complex relationship America had with immigration, a mixture of welcome and wariness, hope and hardship. Ellis Island shaped the face of America. It was where many shed old identities and began new stories. Stories that built neighborhoods, industries, and cultural traditions in cities across the nation. Little Italy and Chinatown, cultural bubbles. Once inside American cities, immigrants often gathered in ethnic enclaves, neighborhoods where language, customs, and cuisine made a new country feel like home. Two of the most famous were Little Italy and Chinatown. Little Italy neighborhoods sprang up in cities like New York, Boston, and San Francisco. These vibrant communities were filled with Italian restaurants, churches, and festivals. Streets echoed with Italian dialects, and families kept traditions alive through food and faith. Chinatowns, on the other hand, became sanctuaries for Chinese immigrants facing discrimination and exclusion laws. The dense streets, adorned with lanterns and pagoda-style roofs, held markets, herbal shops, and theaters. These cultural bubbles provided safety and social support. Within them, newcomers found jobs, shared resources, and celebrated familiar holidays. They preserved languages and stories from across the ocean. Yet, these enclaves also faced challenges. Crowded living conditions, poverty, and prejudice made life hard. Still, their distinct identities enriched the American urban tapestry, creating neighborhoods that became cultural landmarks. Irish influence in Boston. Boston's story is inseparable from the Irish immigrants who arrived in waves during the 19th century, especially during the Great Famine of the 1840s. Fleeing starvation and political unrest, Irish immigrants sought refuge in Boston's ports and neighborhoods. The Irish faced discrimination and hardship but quickly became a powerful community in the city. They worked as laborers, building canals, railroads, and the city's infrastructure. Politically, the Irish rose to prominence through local government and organizations like the Boston Irish political machine, shaping the city's leadership for decades. Catholic churches and schools became centers of community life. Irish pubs and social clubs kept traditions alive and fostered solidarity. Boston's identity became closely linked with its Irish roots, an identity marked by resilience, faith, and influence, reflected in the city's politics, culture, and sports. Jewish communities in New York. New York's immigrant tapestry included a vast influx of Jewish settlers, primarily from Eastern Europe, escaping pogroms and persecution in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Settling mainly in the Lower East Side, Jewish immigrants brought vibrant traditions, Yiddish theater, synagogues, and bustling markets. They worked as tailors, factory workers, and small business owners, contributing to the city's booming garment industry and economy. Jewish communities were often tight-knit, focused on education and social justice, with many becoming active in labor unions and progressive politics. The story of these neighborhoods is one of survival, adaptation, and cultural pride, a community balancing preservation of heritage with integration into American life. Scandinavian settlers in Minneapolis. Moving to the Midwest, Minneapolis became a magnet for Scandinavian immigrants from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Drawn by jobs in milling, lumber, and farming, these settlers shaped the city's culture and economy. The Scandinavians brought traditions of folk music, crafts, and Lutheran faith. They emphasized community cooperation and education, founding schools, churches, and social clubs. Their influence is seen in Minneapolis's architecture, festivals, and the famous North American culture that thrives to this day. Scandinavian settlers helped turn Minneapolis into a prosperous city, blending Old World values with New World ambitions. Polish and German districts in Chicago. Chicago's rapid industrial growth attracted waves of Polish and German immigrants who created distinct neighborhoods with rich cultural life. Polish settlers founded churches, fraternal organizations, and newspapers in Polish language, fostering a strong sense of identity despite assimilation pressures. German immigrants contributed to Chicago's brewing industry, education systems, and architecture. Their influence is seen in beer gardens, music halls, and social clubs. Both groups worked in factories and railroads, enduring tough working conditions but building communities that supported each other through thick and thin. Chicago's diverse neighborhoods reflect the persistence and pride of these immigrant groups, shaping the city's character in lasting ways. Latin American roots in Miami. Miami's story as an immigrant city took a different turn in the 20th century, becoming a gateway for Latin American migrants and refugees. Cuban exiles fleeing political upheaval in the 1950s and 60s brought vibrant culture, cuisine, and entrepreneurial spirit. Miami's neighborhoods like Little Havana became centers of Cuban culture, where music, art, and community gatherings thrive. Other Latin American groups, Puerto Ricans, Colombians, Venezuelans, added to the city's diversity, making Miami a mosaic of languages and traditions. The city's tropical climate and geographic proximity to Latin America created a unique immigrant experience blending American urban life with Caribbean and Latin influences. The making of the melting pot. American cities earned the nickname melting pot because of the mixing and merging of diverse immigrant cultures. Over decades, immigrants brought languages, foods, religions, and customs that mingled and transformed the urban landscape. Neighborhoods began to blend as second- and third-generation immigrants integrated, adopting American customs while preserving ancestral roots. This cultural fusion shaped American music, cuisine, fashion, and politics, making cities places of dynamic cultural exchange. The melting pot was not without tension, but it was a powerful engine of innovation and identity, reflecting America's complex, evolving society. Ethnic tensions and urban riots. Alongside stories of cultural richness, American cities faced periods of ethnic tension and conflict. Competition for jobs, housing, and political power sometimes erupted into violence. The draft riots in New York, 1863, or the Chicago race riots, 1919, being grim examples. Prejudice and discrimination led to segregation and social divisions, with immigrant groups often pitted against one another or against established populations. Yet, these conflicts also sparked movements for civil rights, labor reforms, and community organization, gradually pushing cities toward greater equity. The history of ethnic tensions reveals the challenges of diversity, but also the resilience of urban communities seeking justice and coexistence. Neighborhood identity and survival. Despite hardships, immigrant neighborhoods forged identities that survive today in food, festivals, language, and architecture. Many neighborhoods have maintained their cultural roots while adapting to changing demographics, creating layered histories visible in city streets. Preservation efforts, museums, and community centers celebrate immigrant contributions, reminding us of the human stories behind urban growth. Neighborhood identity is a testament to survival, how communities nurture belonging and pride amid the pressures of change. In the quiet moments of these neighborhoods, one can still feel the echoes of immigrant dreams, struggles, and triumphs, the foundation of America's cities. The light bulb and electrified cities. At the dawn of the 20th century, cities began to glow like never before, thanks to one of the most transformative inventions of the era, the electric light bulb. Thomas Edison's breakthrough sparked a revolution that changed urban life forever. Before electricity, streets were lit by gas lamps or candles, which were dim, unreliable, and often dangerous. The spread of electric lighting illuminated streets, homes, and workplaces, extending productive hours well into the night. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia quickly adopted electric streetlights. Suddenly, night became safer and more vibrant, with bustling shops, theaters, and social spots that stayed open late. Electricity also powered streetcars and subways, facilitating urban expansion. It brought new industries and technologies to life, from factories humming with electric machines to elevators rising in tall buildings. The glow of electrified cities became a symbol of progress and modernity, lighting the way for an urban future filled with innovation and possibility. Subways beneath the streets. As cities grew rapidly, surface streets became congested with horse-drawn carriages, trolleys, and pedestrians. The solution was to take transportation underground, the birth of the subway system. New York City opened its first subway line in 1904, a marvel of engineering that allowed thousands of people to travel quickly beneath the chaos above. Soon, Boston, Chicago, and Philadelphia followed with their own systems. Subways transformed urban life, making it possible for people to live farther from their jobs while still commuting efficiently. They knitted together diverse neighborhoods and helped cities spread out horizontally. Building these underground railways was no easy task. It involved digging through solid rock, managing water, and constructing elaborate tunnels and stations. But the rewards reshaped cities forever. Subways remain iconic symbols of urban life, representing the ingenuity and determination of city planners to solve the challenges of a crowded, growing world. Skyscrapers and city skylines. The dawn of the skyscraper marked a new era of architectural ambition. With innovations like steel frame construction and the safety elevator, buildings reached skyward, transforming flat cityscapes into towering skylines. Chicago is often credited as the birthplace of the skyscraper with the Home Insurance Building in 1885. New York soon followed, with iconic structures like the Woolworth Building and later the Empire State Building. Skyscrapers allowed cities to maximize limited land space, concentrating offices, homes, and businesses vertically. They became symbols of economic power, progress, and human ingenuity. Beyond function, skyscrapers influenced culture. They inspired art, photography, and a new urban identity defined by soaring glass and steel giants that seemed to touch the sky. The modern skyline became a city's signature, a testament to innovation, ambition, and the endless possibilities of urban life. Central parks and urban greenery. As cities grew denser and more industrial, people craved nature's calm within the urban hustle. The creation of Central Park in New York in the 1850s set a precedent for urban green spaces worldwide. Designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vose, Central Park was a carefully crafted natural oasis. Winding paths, open meadows, lakes, and woodlands, offering respite for city dwellers. The park served many purposes: a place for exercise, socializing, relaxation, and cultural events. It was a democratic space open to all classes. Following Central Park's success, other cities created their own parks and greenways, recognizing the vital role of nature in public health and community well-being. Urban greenery became essential, balancing concrete with trees, and providing fresh air, beauty, and a connection to the natural world amidst city life. Theaters, operas, and movie palaces. The age of innovation wasn't only about technology, it also sparked cultural blossoming. Cities became hubs for entertainment, with grand theaters, operas, and movie palaces opening their doors. Opera houses brought European classical music and drama to American audiences. Theaters hosted vaudeville shows, plays, and musicals, providing affordable, diverse entertainment. With the invention of motion pictures, movie palaces arose, lavish, ornate theaters designed to transport audiences into worlds of imagination and fantasy. These venues were architectural marvels, with intricate designs, plush seating, and dazzling lighting. They created a sense of occasion, drawing crowds from all social classes. Entertainment became a major industry, reflecting and shaping urban life's rhythms, dreams, and social fabric. Urban planning movements. As cities expanded rapidly, challenges like overcrowding, sanitation, and traffic congestion demanded thoughtful solutions. The urban planning movement emerged to design better, healthier, and more organized cities. Pioneers like Daniel Burnham championed the City Beautiful movement, emphasizing aesthetics, parks, wide boulevards, and monumental public buildings. Plans for cities like Chicago's 1909 Plan of Chicago aimed to integrate green spaces, improve transportation, and create harmonious urban environments. Urban planners worked to address housing shortages, improve sewage systems, and regulate building heights and density. These efforts laid the groundwork for modern city planning, balancing growth with livability and shaping the physical and social landscape of the American city. Roads, highways, and the rise of the car. The invention of the automobile radically altered urban life. Early 20th century cities were designed for horses and streetcars, but cars demanded new infrastructure, roads, highways, and parking. Cities built paved streets, widened avenues, and later developed highway systems connecting suburbs to downtowns. The car gave people freedom to live farther from work, fueling suburban expansion and changing commuting patterns. However, this growth also brought challenges: traffic jams, pollution, and the reshaping of neighborhoods to accommodate cars rather than pedestrians. Still, the automobile became a defining feature of modern urban culture, symbolizing independence and progress. Science in the cities. Urban centers became hubs for scientific innovation. Laboratories, universities, and research institutions flourished, pushing knowledge forward. Cities attracted brilliant minds in physics, chemistry, biology, and engineering, contributing to advances that improved daily life. Electricity, transportation, medicine, and communication all benefited from urban-based scientific work. Public museums and science fairs educated citizens and inspired future generations. Science in the city symbolized humanity's quest to understand and improve the world, reflecting the optimism and dynamism of the age of innovation. Medical advances in urban hospitals. As populations swelled, so did the need for better healthcare. Urban hospitals expanded and modernized, incorporating medical advances that saved lives. Discoveries like antiseptics, vaccines, and X-rays transformed treatment. Hospitals became centers of specialized care and medical education, often affiliated with universities. Public health campaigns targeted sanitation, nutrition, and disease prevention, addressing urban health crises. These medical advances improved life expectancy and quality of life for millions living in crowded, industrial cities. The birth of the modern urban lifestyle. The age of innovation ushered in the birth of a modern urban lifestyle, fast-paced, diverse, and interconnected. Electric lights, public transit, entertainment venues, and consumer goods shaped daily routines. Shopping districts, department stores, and cafes became social hubs. New technologies like telephones and radios connected people beyond their neighborhoods. This era laid the foundation for the 20th century city, a place where innovation and culture intertwined, creating new possibilities and challenges. The modern urban lifestyle reflected the dreams, struggles, and hopes of millions who made cities their home. Cities during the Civil War. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, profoundly reshaped the nation's cities, turning many into vital hubs of war production, strategy, and social change. Urban centers like Washington, D.C., Richmond, and Philadelphia became nerve centers of political power, military planning, and supply chains. Washington, D.C., the Union capital, swelled with soldiers, government officials, and refugees. It transformed into a bustling wartime city, with hospitals treating thousands of wounded soldiers and factories producing weapons, uniforms, and ammunition. Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital, faced immense pressure and hardship. Bombarded by Union forces and strained by the war's demands, it endured shortages, social unrest, and eventual destruction. Northern industrial cities ramped up production to supply the war effort. Factories operated day and night, churning out rifles, cannons, and other military necessities, while railroads transported troops and supplies. The war also accelerated social changes in cities. Women entered factories in large numbers, taking on jobs traditionally held by men, while African Americans sought freedom and new opportunities in northern cities. The Civil War left a lasting imprint on urban America, testing cities' resilience and reshaping their roles in the emerging modern nation. The Southern cities after the war. The war's end brought devastation to many Southern cities. Richmond, Atlanta, Charleston, and others lay in ruins from battles and burnings. The challenge was immense. Rebuild from ashes while facing economic collapse and social upheaval. Reconstruction efforts focused on restoring infrastructure like railroads, bridges, and ports. However, limited resources and political struggles slowed progress. New industries began to emerge as cities diversified beyond agriculture. Textile mills and ironworks took root, often exploiting cheap labor, including freed African Americans and poor whites. Social tensions simmered, with racial violence and segregation policies shaping city life. Despite hardship, Southern cities began a slow transformation, blending scars of war with hopes for renewal, though inequalities and divisions would persist for decades. Urban expansion during World War I. World War I, 1914 to 1918, triggered another wave of urban growth as American cities mobilized to support the war effort. Industrial centers like Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Cleveland expanded rapidly to produce steel, automobiles, and munitions. Factories operated around the clock, drawing workers from rural areas and immigrants seeking economic opportunities. Governments invested in infrastructure improvements, roads, housing, and public services to accommodate swelling populations. War-related jobs offered new roles for women and minorities, shifting urban demographics and social dynamics. Although the war's toll was high, it accelerated technological advances and solidified cities as economic powerhouses shaping America's global role. The Great Migration to the North. One of the most transformative demographic shifts in American history was the Great Migration, the mass movement of African Americans from the rural South to northern cities between 1916 and 1970. Escaping Jim Crow laws, racial violence, and limited economic prospects, millions sought new lives in cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Philadelphia. Northern industries hungry for labor during wartime offered better wages and opportunities, though not free of discrimination. This migration reshaped urban neighborhoods, creating vibrant African American communities rich in culture but also facing overcrowding and racial tensions. The Great Migration changed the social, cultural, and political landscape of American cities, planting seeds for future civil rights movements. Harlem Renaissance and cultural cities. The influx of African Americans during the Great Migration gave rise to the Harlem Renaissance in New York City during the 1920s and 1930s, a flourishing of black art, literature, music, and intellectual life. Harlem became a cultural capital, nurturing figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong. This cultural awakening spread to other cities, influencing jazz scenes in New Orleans and Chicago, theaters in Washington, D.C., and literary circles nationwide. Cities became stages for new expressions of identity, creativity, and political consciousness, enriching the American cultural tapestry. The Harlem Renaissance was a testament to the power of cities as incubators of culture and social change. Cities of World War II, Detroit, New York, and L.A. During World War II, cities like Detroit, New York, and Los Angeles took center stage in the national war effort. Detroit, the arsenal of democracy, became a powerhouse of war production, converting automobile factories to produce tanks, planes, and weapons. New York's ports and shipyards were crucial for transporting troops and supplies overseas, while its diverse population contributed in every wartime capacity. Los Angeles grew rapidly due to its shipbuilding industry, aerospace manufacturing, and military bases, laying foundations for its post-war boom. The war effort transformed these cities, boosting employment and technological innovation but also highlighting racial and labor inequalities. War factories and Rosie the Riveter. War factories across the nation symbolized the industrial might supporting victory. A notable cultural icon emerged, Rosie the Riveter, representing the millions of women who joined the workforce during the war. Women operated heavy machinery, built aircraft, and maintained critical supply chains, breaking gender norms and laying groundwork for future social changes. These factories were centers of productivity and patriotism, but also of hardship, as workers faced long hours and dangerous conditions. The war demonstrated the essential role of cities in mobilizing human and material resources on an unprecedented scale. Refugees and urban diversity. World War II also brought waves of refugees and immigrants to American cities, adding new layers to urban diversity. European Jews fleeing the Holocaust found communities in New York and other cities. Displaced persons from war-torn countries arrived seeking safety and opportunity. This influx enriched cultural life but also created challenges in housing, employment, and social integration. Cities became microcosms of global conflict and hope, reflecting both the tragedies and resilience of humanity. Post-war rebuilding and zoning. After the war, cities faced the task of rebuilding and modernization. Federal programs like the GI Bill helped veterans buy homes, fueling suburban growth. Urban renewal projects aimed to replace blighted areas with new housing, parks, and commercial centers, though sometimes displacing low-income communities. Zoning laws shaped land use, separating residential, commercial, and industrial areas to improve urban order. These policies aimed to create healthier, more efficient cities but also sparked debates about equity and community identity. The baby boom and city planning. The post-war baby boom led to a population explosion, putting new pressure on urban infrastructure. Cities and suburbs expanded rapidly, requiring new schools, hospitals, roads, and parks. City planners embraced modernist ideas, emphasizing open spaces, highways, and single-family homes. This era defined the shape of American metropolitan areas, balancing growth with the needs of families. The baby boom's impact continues to influence urban development and demographic trends today. The urban crisis of the 1960s. The 1960s marked a turbulent chapter in the history of American cities, often referred to as the urban crisis. This period saw deep social, economic, and political challenges converging in urban centers across the nation. Post-war prosperity had begun to fade for many city dwellers, especially in minority and working-class neighborhoods. Economic decline hit industrial cities hard as factories closed or moved elsewhere, leading to widespread unemployment. The infrastructure in many cities became outdated and decayed. Housing, schools, and transportation systems suffered from neglect. Segregation and systemic racism compounded these problems, creating stark inequalities. Political leaders struggled to address these complex issues, while urban residents organized to demand justice and improvements. The urban crisis was a time of deep frustration but also of awakening, setting the stage for new movements and urban transformations. Suburban flight and hollow cities. One of the defining features of the mid-20th century urban decline was suburban flight, the migration of middle-class families, especially white Americans, from city centers to newly developed suburbs. This exodus was driven by factors such as affordable housing, car ownership, and federal policies that favored suburban development. As people left, cities were left with shrinking tax bases, deteriorating services, and abandoned neighborhoods, leading to what many called hollow cities. Inner-city schools, public transportation, and infrastructure suffered, and many urban areas became pockets of poverty. This demographic shift deeply altered the physical and social landscapes of American metropolitan areas, challenging city leaders to rethink urban policy. Riots, protests, and civil rights movements. The 1960s and early 1970s were marked by waves of urban unrest, sparked by long-standing racial injustices, economic disparities, and police brutality. Cities like Watts, Los Angeles, Detroit, Newark, and others experienced violent riots as frustration boiled over. These events drew national attention to the urgent need for civil rights and social reforms. At the same time, the civil rights movement gained momentum, with urban leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens advocating for equality, fair housing, and better economic opportunities. Urban protests, marches, and grassroots organizing reshaped city politics and policies, though progress was slow and uneven. Detroit's fall and rise. Detroit became emblematic of the broader urban crisis, once hailed as the Motor City for its booming automobile industry. By the late 20th century, the city faced factory closures, massive unemployment, and a declining population. The 1967 Detroit riot underscored deep racial and economic tensions. Yet Detroit's story is also one of rebirth. In recent decades, efforts to revive the city have focused on downtown redevelopment, tech startups, and cultural renaissance. Artists, entrepreneurs, and new residents have begun transforming parts of Detroit into vibrant neighborhoods, signaling hope for the future. New York in bankruptcy. By the mid-1970s, New York City faced a severe fiscal crisis, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Years of economic decline, rising crime, and suburban flight drained city resources. The city's budget deficit soared, and services like policing, sanitation, and education suffered. Federal and state bailouts, combined with austerity measures and new leadership, helped New York avoid collapse. The crisis reshaped the city's financial management and planning, eventually leading to a remarkable comeback that re-established New York as a global capital. The crack epidemic and crime waves. The 1980s and early 1990s brought new challenges as the crack cocaine epidemic devastated many urban neighborhoods. Crime rates soared, fueled by drug trafficking, gang violence, and social dislocation. Families and communities were deeply affected, with increased incarceration and strained police-community relations. Cities responded with aggressive policing strategies, social programs, and community organizing. This era highlighted the ongoing struggles cities faced in balancing law enforcement, public health, and social justice. Gentrification begins. Amid urban decline, some neighborhoods began attracting a new wave of residents, artists, young professionals, and entrepreneurs seeking affordable housing and cultural vibrancy. This process, known as gentrification, transformed areas like Brooklyn's Williamsburg, San Francisco's Mission District, and Washington, D.C.'s Shore neighborhood. While gentrification brought investment, improved services, and new businesses, it also raised concerns about displacement and loss of community identity. The phenomenon sparked debates about who cities are for and how to balance growth with inclusivity. Artists and bohemians in the cities. Artists and bohemian communities played a vital role in urban rebirth during the late 20th century. They often moved into affordable, neglected neighborhoods, bringing creativity, galleries, music venues, and new energy. These cultural hubs became incubators for innovation and social change, attracting wider attention and investment. Cities began to recognize the value of supporting arts and culture as engines of economic development. The story of artists in cities is one of resilience, transformation, and the power of creativity to reshape urban life. Historical preservation movements. As cities evolved, many citizens and activists fought to preserve historic buildings and neighborhoods threatened by redevelopment. The historic preservation movement sought to protect architectural heritage, cultural landmarks, and community memory. Landmarks like Boston's Beacon Hill, Philadelphia's Old City, and New Orleans' French Quarter became protected zones. Preservation efforts balanced development pressures with respect for history, contributing to tourism and civic pride. This movement helped redefine the relationship between past and future in America's cities. Mayors who revived their cities. In the face of decline, visionary mayors emerged who worked tirelessly to revive their cities. Leaders like Ed Koch in New York, Coleman Young in Detroit, and Tom Bradley in Los Angeles implemented policies addressing crime, economic development, and urban renewal. They forged partnerships with business, community groups, and governments to rebuild infrastructure and attract investment. Their efforts helped shift narratives from decay to hope and set examples for urban governance nationwide. The leadership of these mayors was critical in steering cities toward rebirth and resilience. Silicon Valley and the new economy. Silicon Valley, located in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area, became the symbol of America's transformation from an industrial powerhouse to a global leader in technology and innovation. Originally a region dotted with orchards and small towns, by the late 20th century it evolved into the world's foremost hub for high-tech development. The rise of companies like Hewlett-Packard, Apple, Google, and Facebook defined a new economy driven by software, semiconductors, and internet services. This transformation reshaped the urban landscape with sprawling campuses, incubators, and a flow of highly skilled workers from around the globe. Silicon Valley's success had ripple effects on housing markets, transportation infrastructure, and local culture, drawing both admiration and criticism. The region pioneered the startup culture, encouraging risk-taking and creativity while accelerating urban growth and economic shifts. Seattle, tech giant on the Sound. Seattle's emergence as a tech powerhouse is inseparable from the rise of companies like Microsoft and Amazon. Nestled on Puget Sound, the city transformed from a lumber and shipping center into a dynamic hub for cloud computing, software development, and e-commerce. Seattle's waterfront skyline grew rapidly with office towers and modern neighborhoods, reflecting its booming economy. The city attracted young professionals seeking both career opportunities and a high quality of life, supported by thriving arts, music, and outdoor recreation scenes. Yet, rapid growth brought challenges including housing affordability, traffic congestion, and social inequality, prompting city leaders to balance innovation with sustainability and inclusion. Austin, weird, young, and booming. Austin, Texas, cultivated a unique identity with its unofficial slogan, "Keep Austin Weird." Known for its vibrant music scene, cultural festivals, and youthful vibe, Austin became a magnet for tech companies and startups, especially as a lower-cost alternative to Silicon Valley. The city's growth was fueled by a talented workforce from nearby universities and an entrepreneurial spirit. Tech giants like Dell, along with newer companies, helped Austin emerge as a booming tech hub. Urban planners faced the challenge of managing rapid population growth while preserving the city's quirky charm and live music culture. Austin's story is one of blending innovation with a strong sense of place. San Diego, military and microchips. San Diego's development in the tech era was shaped by its dual roles as a military stronghold and a center for microelectronics. Home to one of the largest naval bases on the West Coast, the city's economy intertwined defense spending with emerging tech industries. The presence of universities and research institutions fostered innovation in biotechnology, telecommunications, and semiconductor manufacturing. San Diego's beautiful coastline and mild climate also contributed to its appeal, blending urban growth with a relaxed coastal lifestyle. Miami's global rise. Miami, once known primarily for tourism and retirement communities, grew into a vibrant global city with strong economic ties to Latin America and the Caribbean. The city's multicultural population infused it with unique cultural vibrancy, reflected in neighborhoods like Little Havana. In the tech era, Miami attracted international investment, fintech companies, and entrepreneurs, positioning itself as a gateway for global business. Its skyline transformed with luxury high-rises and modern infrastructure, while issues like rising sea levels and climate change began to influence urban planning. Atlanta and the media boom. Atlanta rose as a major media and entertainment center, fueled by companies like CNN and a growing film industry. The city's strategic location as a transportation hub and business center complemented its media presence. Atlanta embraced its role as a cultural capital for the South, with music, arts, and sports drawing national attention. The media boom brought jobs and investment, but also raised questions about equitable growth and preserving historic communities. Denver and remote work migration. Denver became an attractive destination in the tech era, especially as remote work gained popularity. The city offered a mix of urban amenities, access to outdoor recreation, and a relatively affordable cost of living compared to coastal tech hubs. Startups and established companies expanded in Denver, and migration from other states boosted housing demand. City leaders worked to improve transportation and infrastructure to keep pace with growth while maintaining quality of life. Smart cities and sustainability. The rise of technology also brought innovations in smart city initiatives aimed at improving urban living through data, sensors, and connected infrastructure. Cities invested in sustainable energy, efficient public transit, and waste management systems to address environmental challenges. From smart traffic lights to green buildings, technology became a tool for balancing growth with ecological responsibility. These efforts represented a vision of cities that are not only larger but also cleaner, safer, and more responsive to residents' needs. Rising rents and homelessness. The tech boom's economic benefits were accompanied by social challenges, notably rising rents and a surge in homelessness. As housing demand outpaced supply in tech hubs, Many longtime residents found themselves priced out of neighborhoods. Homelessness became a visible crisis, spurring debates over affordable housing policies, social services, and urban inequality. Cities grappled with how to foster economic growth while ensuring that prosperity reached all residents. Digital infrastructure and connectivity. At the heart of the tech era's urban transformation was the expansion of digital infrastructure. Broadband internet, 5G networks, and data centers became critical to city economies and residents' daily lives. Connectivity enabled new ways of working, learning, and interacting, shaping the urban experience. Investments in digital infrastructure also highlighted disparities, as some neighborhoods struggled with access. Closing the digital divide became a key priority for cities striving to be truly modern and inclusive. Music and soundscapes of cities. American cities have always been alive with sound, from the rhythmic clatter of streetcars to the vibrant pulse of jazz clubs. Music is often the heartbeat of urban life, shaping the identity and soul of a place. New Orleans gave birth to jazz, a genre born from a blend of African, Caribbean, and European influences, echoing the city's diverse history. Chicago's blues scene painted stories of struggle and hope during the Great Migration, while Detroit's Motown sound captured the spirit of unity and ambition. Beyond genres, the everyday sounds, street musicians, church bells, market chatter, and subway announcements create a unique urban soundscape. These layers of sound provide a sense of place and community, reminding city dwellers of their shared history and daily rhythms. Street food and ethnic cuisines. No city's soul is complete without its food. The streets of American cities are a culinary tapestry woven from the flavors of immigrant communities. Food trucks and market stalls offer everything from New York's famous hot dogs and Italian cannoli to San Francisco's dim sum and Chicago's deep dish pizza. Neighborhoods like Little Italy, Chinatown, and Koreatown provide cultural windows through food, where traditional recipes are preserved and adapted. Street food brings people together, breaking down barriers and celebrating diversity. It is a vital part of city life, nourishing bodies and connecting generations. Public libraries and urban learning. Public libraries stand as beacons of knowledge and inclusion in urban landscapes. From the grandeur of the New York Public Library to small community branches, libraries provide free access to books, technology, and learning programs. These institutions foster lifelong learning, support immigrants mastering English, and offer safe spaces for youth and the elderly alike. In cities, libraries are more than repositories of books. They are hubs of community engagement, cultural events, and digital literacy, playing a key role in the social fabric. Murals, graffiti, and public art. The walls of American cities tell stories, some painted in vibrant murals, others tagged with graffiti. Public art transforms ordinary streets into open-air galleries, reflecting the hopes, struggles, and creativity of residents. Murals often commemorate historical events, honor cultural icons, or voice social justice messages. Cities like Philadelphia and Los Angeles are famous for their rich mural traditions. Graffiti, once viewed solely as vandalism, has evolved into an art form that challenges perceptions and claims urban spaces as sites of expression. City festivals and street life. Festivals bring city streets to life, celebrating everything from ethnic heritage to music, food, and the arts. Mardi Gras in New Orleans, the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York, and the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. highlight the diversity and vibrancy of urban cultures. Street fairs, parades, and outdoor markets encourage community participation and strengthen neighborhood bonds. These events break down daily routines, infusing cities with color, music, and joy, reminding residents of shared identity and collective celebration. Community gardens and urban farms. Amid concrete and steel, community gardens and urban farms offer green sanctuaries. These spaces provide fresh produce, promote environmental stewardship, and create gathering spots for neighbors. In cities like Detroit and New York, urban agriculture has become a tool for food justice and neighborhood revitalization. Gardens foster social ties, empower residents, and reconnect city dwellers with nature, grounding urban life in cycles of growth and renewal. Churches, mosques, and temples. Religious institutions have shaped the spiritual and social landscapes of American cities. From soaring cathedrals to modest storefront mosques, places of worship serve as centers of faith, cultural preservation, and community support. Churches often played roles in social movements, such as the civil rights struggle, while mosques and temples offer immigrants places to maintain traditions and forge new identities. These sacred spaces enrich the city's cultural mosaic and provide continuity amidst change. The people, voices from the pavement. Cities are ultimately defined by their people. The voices from the pavement, street vendors, artists, activists, commuters, bring cities to life with their stories and struggles. Oral histories capture the hopes and hardships of urban residents, revealing the human dimension behind the skyline. The resilience, creativity, and diversity of city dwellers shape the ever-changing soul of American cities. The nightlife and quiet corners. As day fades, cities transform. Neon lights illuminate nightlife districts buzzing with music, dance, and social energy. Bars, clubs, theaters, and late-night eateries offer spaces for connection and celebration. Yet cities also harbor quiet corners, parks bathed in moonlight, cozy cafes, and hidden alleys, where solitude and reflection are possible. This duality of vibrancy and tranquility creates the rhythm of urban life, catering to the diverse needs of its inhabitants. What makes a city feel like home? Beyond buildings and infrastructure, it is the intangible qualities that make a city feel like home. The familiarity of faces, the comfort of local haunts, and the sense of belonging in neighborhoods. Shared traditions, communal memories, and everyday interactions weave a sense of identity. The soul of a city lives in the relationships and connections that endure amidst constant change, offering a place where people can thrive and find meaning.